So what triggered the invention of the bicycle? In fact, it was the eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia on the 5th of April 1815. Ash was thrown 43 kilometres into the air. The explosions were heard 1,600 miles away. Between 71,000 and 121,000 people died. The ash covered the northern hemisphere with the result that harvests failed right across Europe. 40,000 Germans fled the country to avoid starvation. At the time, in 1815, everything was done by horse. You rode a horse, you rode in a carriage, you went on a stagecoach drawn by horses. Goods were transported by carts and wagons drawn by horses, and canal transport was with the horse pulling the barges. So the inevitable question was, do we use the food we've got to feed people, or do we feed horses? A German thought about it and decided that what we needed to do was replace the horses. And Baron von Dreis invented the first bicycle. So van Dreis's bright idea was to have two cartwheels, one behind the other. And as you can see, what he did was join the two wheels together with a plank of wood, had handlebars to move the front wheel, and you used your feet to move the bike and to stop it. Going downhill, there were two flanges which you put your feet on, and again you had to use your feet to stop the bike because there's no brakes. A chap called Johnson got the patent for building these machines, and he had a school in the Strand to teach people how to ride. The bikes became very popular with the rich, and at the time cartoons were at their heyday, and this became known as the hobby horse. And various members of the royal family, particularly the Duke of York and the Prince Regent, were sent up with them on the horse and their lady friends, their hobby, with them. The bikes originally were thought to be replacing the horses, and one of the cartoons shows a horse dealer selling bikes, but the horse had dire consequences. In fact, that never happened. There were lots of accidents, and the horse had the last laugh. The craze lasted for about 9 months in 1819, and then it died down, and bicycles we only used on estates, and they became known as dandy horses. Horse because you rode it astride, and dandy because they were in their finery going round the estate. This is a replica hobby horse of an 1821 design. So after the hobby horse, nothing really happened until 1861, nearly 40 years later. Then Ernest and Pierre Michaud invented the crank, i.e. a pedal, and that was fixed directly onto the front wheel. And now, every turn of the wheel, you could go faster. And indeed, they went along at about 8 miles an hour, which is 13 kilometres a mile. There were a lot of accidents, because when you went downhill, you tended to take your feet off the pedals, and feet got trapped between the spokes. So they invented these two flanges on top, and you put your feet on here, you went downhill, front feet first. The early bikes did not have a brake, and again, to stop it, you'd have to back pedal or use your feet on the ground. However, this later version does have a brake, and if you look, there's a wire going down from the handlebars, and you twist the handlebars to tighten it, and then the wire goes down and it affixes what's called a spoon brake onto the back wheel. But the saddle is perched on a spring, So every time you went over a bump, you went up and down, and hence it got its nickname, the Bone Shaker. The bike was very popular in England from about 1868 to 1870. It only lasted 3 years. And the reason for that was that there was another invention, and that was a flange put on the back wheel. And this helped you get onto the bike and enabled you to have a bigger wheel on the front. This was the precursor to what we now know as the penny farthing, but other inventions made this obsolete after 3 years.
Up until this time, cycling had been the preserve of young and pretty well-off young men. Ladies were not encouraged, it was not seen as a ladylike pastime, and indeed the fashions of the time rather precluded women from going onto bicycles. With the advent of the tricycle, though, things began to change. The tricycle itself was nearly always made of 2 large wheels, and it would have a small steering wheel either at the front, as in this case, or at the back. If it was at the front, then a small balance wheel, like this one down here, was needed so that as you went up steep inclines, the whole tricycle didn't tip back onto you. The example we've got here is a 2-seater with the seats side by side. The controls, as such, no handlebars, you notice, because that would impede getting onto the tricycle, but instead we'd have a tiller steering here, so you would turn the handle and you would turn the steering wheel on there with a simple rack and pinion device along there. On the other side here we had a band brake, huge improvement on some of the other brakes, and all you had to do was push it forward and a band, in this case leather, was tightened around the actual drum on the side there. The big problem with this, as you can probably see, is that it's enormous. And so storage was quite an issue. I guess if you had a big estate, you weren't worried about it. But if you were tight for space, then they came up with the little wheeze that the wheel could be taken off, part of the frame could be removed, the wheel replaced, and now you had a single-seater tricycle. The tricycles started to go out of fashion with the arrival of the safety bike, although it did find a use in terms of delivery bikes and for children, a role which it still holds today. Okay, so as so happens with the new forms of transport, people want to travel faster and faster. And the only way you could do that with the velocipede was to pedal quicker or get a larger wheel. The solution came along with the invention of the very large front wheel, but there was a difficulty there. The whole bike was liable to get too big, and so they had to reduce the size of the rear wheel and tuck it underneath, which led to this new genre of cycle which became known as the high rider, because of the height there, or the high wheeler, or later on just simply the ordinary. Now this is the aerial bike. The interesting part was this crossbar here, which was brazed into the central hub. The ends were connected to the end of the crossbar and down to the rim. By adjusting the tension on the 2 bars here, you could tension all the spokes at one go. In this case, we also have a brake fitted at the back here. Wasn't the most efficient, it just rubbed onto the end of the wheel there and was activated by rotating the handlebars there, which pulled on a wire through these pulleys, and would gradually, the brake at the back here will make contact with the small wheel and give you a certain amount of stopping power not a significant amount, I suspect. And certainly tumbles and spills were not unusual. But since it was the youth, the rather adventurous types who were cycling here, if you came off and got bumps and scratches and cuts, that was perceived as a badge of honour. The bike started to go out of fashion. As its demise was coming around, it acquired the name of the penny farthing. The serious riders considered this to be a very derogatory term, and it was frowned upon massively. So it continued with the enthusiasts for many years after it had actually gone out of fashion with the well-to-do young men of the era.
This is an ordinary bicycle. This, in fact, is a racing bike. It's tubular steel rather than solid to make it lighter and therefore faster. It's got drop handlebars so that the rider is lower and therefore more aerodynamically efficient. The idea was that the bigger the front wheel, the further you went on each turn of the crank. So what was the limit to the size of the front wheel? Well, it was the inside leg of the rider. So the taller the man, the bigger the wheel, the faster he went. Getting on is an art. Most penny farthings have a flange here, and what you do is you run downhill scooting with your left foot on the flange, and then when you've got up enough speed, you leap up onto the saddle and off you go. Getting off is the reverse. You slow the bike down and then you slide off the back. That's the theory anyway. As I said at the beginning, this bike lasted for about 10 years, and then they introduced the safety bike, named for obvious reasons. Okay, so the last two bikes we're going to look at are from the 20th century. This one is a BSA bike, and it has two wing nuts here and there. So it's an early folding bike, but it's somewhat specialised because it was designed so that you folded it, you put it on your back, and then you jumped out of an aircraft. It's a parabike. The idea was that in D-Day and at Arnhem, you needed to take bridges of strategic importance. If you parachuted down near the bridge, you would be seen, and the element of surprise is lost. So the principle was you parachuted down a few miles from the bridge with your bike, you got on the bike, pedalled, and had the element of surprise when you got to the bridge. The bikes were recorded on D-Day as soldiers got off the landing craft, but there isn't any photographic evidence to show that they were actually used as parabikes. There are large numbers built between 1939 and 1945, and they are very robust. There's a clip here where they would have a puncture kit on the back, and they are heavy-duty bicycles. There's one front brake, but nothing on the back, because that would be more difficult to manage when you folded it up.
Now we come to what is almost a novelty bike, although it was heavily promoted by the Italian leader Mussolini. It is based on an Italian design, the Velocino, and this is actually a German later version from the 60s. It was produced as a very safe, light, easy to manoeuvre and store type solution to the cycling in towns. In towns it was reasonably successful on short journeys, but anything else it struggled. One of the big problems with it was the rider's position. Sitting on it here, you are in a very upright position, so you cannot get the full force of your legs pushing on the pedals. So it made it very hard work if you're going against a headwind, and was notoriously sluggish going uphill. The handlebars normally were kept this way round, so that, as the advertising said, it made it much safer. So in an emergency, you could just step out of the machine rather than have any serious accident. I have no verification of that to be true. It was not a popular bike over here. It sold in few numbers, as I said before, for light journeys around town, but never took off in any big way. As such, finding examples now are quite rare. One aspect, though, was picked up on, and that was having the handlebars underneath the rider. Many years later, Sir Clive Sinclair picked up on this when he created his Sinclair C5, but after a few years it had the same fate as this and was never really taken up by the public.
In the gallery we've got about 40 cycles. That includes tricycles and bicycles. We also have a collection of lamps, lots of posters of the period. In the main museum we've also got 3 or 4 bicycles, including a GPO delivery tricycle from the 1920s. The museum has its own visitor centre with cafe, shop and the usual facilities, and we also have a play area for children in the main bus museum.